So I thought it important from the superintendent's standpoint and from senior staff standpoint to give the board a summary of where we are to date and to provide that summary for our publics and our stakeholders as well. So that's why it's called an introduction to our discussions, because the board has not made any significant decisions here yet, but it's important that everybody be very clear on where the board stands in this regard. So in summary, if you remember from last year, we had a budget shortfall of $3.8 million. For the 2012-2013 school year, the budget shortfall is $6 million, for a total shortfall, obviously, of $9.8 million. In this particular school year, or excuse me, in the 2012-2013 budget, the reduction target from the province equated to $3 million, and we are estimating very closely to $3 million in regards to cost pressures. And a couple examples of cost pressures are on the slide there. As you're all aware, electricity in Nova Scotia rose 9% in January, and the difference between fuel costs between last budget year and this budget year is approximately 6%. So those would be two very easy examples of cost pressures that would put pressure on our budgetary discussions. So as you can see, our total over the last 2 years going into this budget year is $9.8 million that we've had to remove from the system. And that's, of course, to meet the fiscal responsibilities of the province as well as to meet the needs of our students. For your information, provincially, when you include the reductions plus the cost pressures, it equates to approximately from $65 to $70 million that's been taken out of the system to meet these targets and to address the cost pressures that boards have had to absorb. And of course, it begs the question, Mr. Chair, that's a very significant reduction over 2 years, and it certainly begs the question of what reduction will be coming in future years. One of the things I want to explain to the board, and as you're all aware, I'm the president of ANSIA, and these are some of the discussions we've been having on a provincial level. But it's important for me to be clear and try to explain this issue around the decline in enrollment in Nova Scotia and the increased cost of education in Nova Scotia. And that's a serious issue. I understand the issue very well. I've lived the issue for most of my career. But it's not as simple as just saying that if enrollment declines significantly, then it just makes sense that we should be able to handle significant declines in educational costs. I'm going to try to explain to you why it's not as simple as saying, well, if enrollment declines significantly, costs should significantly decline as well. There are all kinds of reasons why that is not as straightforward as that simple statement, decline in enrollment with increasing costs. So I'm going to try to explain what are some of the reasons why costs have increased when enrollment has declined. And of course, we've experienced significant and let's use the 10-year window. We've experienced a significant increase in costs and wages, and of course, inflation due to Canadian price index. That would certainly be a significant increase in costs. One of the things that when we talk about absorbing costs, the fixed costs that we have in our system have nothing to do with decline in enrollment. And the fixed costs I'm talking about are the maintenance on our buildings, the utilities. Transportation is a really interesting one. We do certainly have significant enrollment declines, but our buses are still traveling the same roads, the same distances, picking up the same families right across rural Nova Scotia. They probably are picking up fewer students, but they still have to travel those same roads to pick up students. And of course, as you realize, fuel costs have significantly increased. Our ability to maintain our buses is significantly increased in costs. And in general, some of those fixed costs just continue to go up. And of course, as a board, we have to absorb that. Our board has been proud of its ability to maintain small community schools. And that's certainly an issue. And one of the other significant issues in Nova Scotia is this issue of excess square footage. The school review process, as board members are very clear on, is a very difficult, long, time-consuming process. And to be perfectly blunt, Mr. Chair, reducing excess square footage in Nova Scotia has not been an easy task. And it's only been recently. And many of you would be aware of what's happened in the Strait Board in the last week or two, where they have taken the opportunity to reduce square footage and actually close some schools. But the school review process is very difficult, long and drawn out, and there hasn't been a lot of movement in Nova Scotia in that regard. And of course, if you have excess square footage, you still have to maintain it, you heat it, you put lights in it, and you have to fix it, no matter how many students are in the building. And finally, I want to talk on this slide about the increased supports that were put in place back in 2005 through to 2007 from Learning for Life 1 and 2. Greater than $48 million was injected into the system to put interventions, supports, and programs in place that were much needed initiatives in Nova Scotia. And so you can see that all those things start to explain why costs have increased, even when enrollment has declined. I want to get a little more detail in this as well. And many of these initiatives came out of Learning for Life 1 and 2, back in 2005, 2006, 2007. But many of the other initiatives have come from the excellent decisions being made at the provincial level through good educational research to put programs, good programs and services in place and initiatives in place for students. They were much needed, and it was excellent that Nova Scotia was able to put those in place. That again contributes to the increased cost of education in Nova Scotia has been coming out of the Nova Scotia Special Education Policy. Rightfully so, the Nova Scotia educational system is inclusive. It is designed, and supports and initiatives are put in place to meet the needs of all students, especially our most challenging students, especially our students who are the most vulnerable. And some examples of these, and again, many of them were increased as a result of Learning for Life 1 and 2 in 2005. But you're aware of the excellent work done by educational assistants, psychologists, speech-language pathologists, and autism specialists. Those are all of those services have been increased over the past years to meet the needs of our students. Again, Learning for Life 1 and 2 and other decisions brought some other initiatives that certainly increased our costs, but put excellent things in place for our students. You're all aware of the class caps in grade primary to 3. And class caps are important in an inclusive education system because of the inclusionary nature of our classrooms. Again, classrooms that are designed to meet the needs of all students and are designed to allow the teacher to maximize the success of all students. We've increased our ability to offer French immersion. We've Learning for Life 1 and 2 increased support for libraries. And you're all aware that in Signecto Central, as well as across Nova Scotia, we've implemented over the past years the International Baccalaureate program. And as you're aware, we have that program in 2 of our sites in Chignecto Central. More examples of targeted initiatives that obviously cost more money, but were put in place for really good reasons. The research is clear. Many of our students need targeted interventions because they just need more time and support to be successful. And again, over the past years, the education system in Nova Scotia has been successful in implementing some excellent interventions for our students. Problem is, they cost more. But they're designed to meet the needs of some very specific groups of students. You're all aware that reading recovery was an intervention for grade 1, and now that's evolved into an excellent program, Succeeding in Reading or Early Literacy Support, that is really working hard to increase the writing and reading skills of early elementary students. It's an excellent research-based initiative. Learning for Life 1 and 2 increase the program support or resource teacher ratios in our province. For example, it increased the resource ratio for elementary to 1 teacher for every 165 students. So if you're going to increase that ratio, it's going to cost more. Teachers have been put in place to look at to support students who are severe learning disabled. Learning for Life 1 and 2 increased the ratio of guidance counselors in Nova Scotia schools up to 500 students for every 1 guidance counselor. Chignecto Central has put in its own initiative, Behavioral Education Support Treatment Program, or the BEST program, which is really a targeted program to work in collaboration with other agencies and to, again, meet the needs of some of our most behaviorally challenged students. And finally, there's been excellent supports put in place to increase the amount of assistive technology resources we have in our system. Targeted interventions that cost more money. And finally, one of our most greatest concerns is our ability to meet the needs of some of our least engaged students that we often find in our junior, senior high schools. And again, the province of Nova Scotia and Chignecto Central have worked hard to increase the number of course options in our high schools. And that's so that we try to meet, we try to find courses that interest and engage our students with the express purpose of keeping them in school longer and making sure they graduate. You would understand that if there's not something in high school for you or something in high school that you're interested in, it's going to be hard for you to stay on track and meet your graduation goals. And finally, some excellent programs have been put in place over the past couple of years. Options and Opportunities, we've had a couple presentations around this board table with that program. And just recently, we had an excellent presentation from the skilled trade students of Hants East Rural High School. 2 excellent programs, specialized, hands-on, to, again, meet the needs of those students. But they cost more. So to make this point and to drive it home, yes, enrollment has decreased in Nova Scotia. But there are many, many reasons, many excellent initiatives that have more than offset the savings that we've got from the decrease in that students. So you really, you just can't say that automatically, if enrollment goes down, it should be very easy to reduce the budgets. not when you've put those kinds of supports and interventions in place to meet the needs of our students. I'm really proud of the system in Nova Scotia. I'm proud to be part of it. All of these programs and services I've talked about, in my opinion, define the comprehensive system of education we have in Nova Scotia that's doing a great job of meeting the needs of our students. One of the issues that we do have is all of those things that I've listed. Parents have come, rightfully so, to expect to have those in place for their children. We continually worry about our most vulnerable students. We continually worry that we have the right things in place to meet their needs, to keep them engaged, to make sure they're successful. And as I said earlier, I think we were on our way to keeping pace with the other provinces. So the question our board's facing is when we're talking about a $6 million reduction, a budget shortfall, coupled with the $3.8 million we talked about last year. There's the list of things that I talked about tonight. And the significant, important question for our board that has to be addressed over the next couple of weeks is, what are we going to reduce? It will not be an easy task. So some background information before I get into specifics about Chignecto Central. Some background information about our budget. And many of you have heard this before. 80 to 85% of our budget is salaries and benefits. So when you think about $6 million, 80 or 85% of that, those are salaries of employees who are working continually to provide services, supports, interventions, and programs for our children. So if you're taking out almost $4.8 million worth of salaries from individuals who are providing all of that for our students, you can see how difficult this situation is. I want to talk about another important point as well. And again, around the board table, we've talked about this. But it's a concern as well. The allocation from the provincial government is $22.6 million for special education. But most boards in this province, and probably all boards in this province, including Chignecto Central, have always spent above and beyond that allocation. In fact, last year, or we anticipate next year, that CCRSB will be spending approximately $27.4 million on special education. And just for your information, our special education budget, 98% of that budget's salaries. So Chignecto Central has been spending at least $4.8 million over and above the amount of money that's been allocated in the profile. We are very concerned that with reductions like the ones we're facing now, will make it extremely difficult for Chignecto Central to continue to supplement that budget to that extent. And we all got copies of the provincial budget document that gave us our targets. And if you remember, it had some graphs in there. And the graphs are clear. In 2012, 2013, it's true that the last few years, including this one, Nova Scotia has had the highest per pupil funding it's ever had. And that's a combination of, as I explained, the increase in costs and decline in enrollment. But Mr. Chair, no matter how you cut it, you can talk about enrollment decline, you can talk about increased costs, you can talk about the fact that the enrollment decline should be able to equate to some savings, and that's probably true to a certain extent. But when all the dust settles, Mr. Chair, Nova Scotia, according to Stats Canada in 2008-2009, was still the second lowest funded province in this country. And when you take a look at the graph, there's Canada, there's Nova Scotia, and this is taken from Stats Can 2008-2009. Every other province, when I study the Stats Canada document, most of the provinces are experiencing enrollment declines. I know those provinces have experienced some of the same increased costs that we have. But when you look at this and try to equate the extensive reductions that we're facing, Nova Scotia is not in a great advantageous position in this country. And I suspect that after the reductions take place, well, I suspect we'll at least be in this position. I don't have the data. But no matter how you cut it, we don't have a Cadillac system. We're not way up there in our funding. We're way down there. Chignecto Central has a very difficult task. As I said earlier, we have a budget shortfall of $6 million. Our starting point has been the percentages of budget. And this is what senior staff have been working on, Mr. Chair. Education Services has about 77% of the budget, so their share of the $6 million is about $4.6 million. Operations has about 20% of the budget. That's transportation and maintenance and custodial services. Has about $1.2 million of that $6 million reduction. And the rest of the three other departments, who are only 3% of the budget, are responsible for, at this point, and the board in its budget deliberations may decide to change this. But for our starting point, we have basically expected that in our reduction scenarios, it will be done in this manner. And as I said, there's nothing holding us to that, and it may be that the board may want to go one way or the other in regards to eventually when it balances its budget. Chignecto Central, especially in the last few years, has put really significant emphasis on increasing the student achievement of our children, of putting supports, programs, and initiatives in place that maximize the success of our children, right from the elementary to the junior high school, to the middle school, to the high school. This board has been proud on a weekly basis to continually look at its system, study its system, and change its system so that we take opportunities to maximize the success of our children. So as we move forward over the next couple of weeks, removing $6 million out of our system is not something that we take lightly. In fact, it's a very difficult situation, and one that I know none of you are looking forward to. I'm comforted by the care and by the experience that you have in regards to putting your best foot forward in this very difficult situation so that you can minimize any of the impacts that this reduction is going to have on our students. The work we've done so far, Mr. Chair, has brought out some interesting trends. There's no question that the scenarios that we've worked on, that we'll see reductions in all of our employee groups. Certainly some employee groups more than others. We've spoken about this already. We're worried about maintaining that extra $4.8 million we put in special education over and above the provincial allocation. There is no question, Mr. Chair, that services, programs, interventions, and supports for children will be reduced. We've talked about this as well. We've got some very robust targets, achievement targets in our strategic plan. I know staff and our teaching staff and our administrative staff and our leadership staff will do anything we can to keep those targets in sight and to make sure we achieve those targets. It's our hope that with this situation won't impede our ability to meet those targets. The public's going to, with this much money coming out of the system in such a short period of time, Signecto Central's education system is not going to be the same. And the public's going to have to understand that we will not be able to provide all the supports and services that they're used to having. And we're going to have to do a good job, Mr. Chair, of communicating that. And the fact is, people's lives are going to be affected, which makes this so difficult. The lives of our students and the lives of our employees. Finally, to finish off, and I appreciate your attention, we have developed many scenarios. We've started the discussions. Board members have had discussions in their committees, and I'm sure board members have had informal discussions on the issues that we're facing. I know, and in my whole career, I don't think I've seen more difficult discussions in a board that's facing a more daunting challenge. I know this process is going to be difficult on you. But as I said earlier, I'm comforted by the fact that you have excellent experience and you'll have the students' best interests in mind. I know it's not easy for you as board members to basically taking actions that will erode the comprehensive education system in Nova Scotia. And finally, I just want to reiterate that our employees, our schools, our classrooms, and our students, there's no way that they won't be negatively impacted by this significant reduction. So the questions people may have is, what about the details? Well, I want to be clear that we want to show where we were. We want to be clear on the issue at hand, the $6 million reduction, the types of decisions that the board will be facing. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, the board is going to be putting a lot of hours and a lot of work and making some final decisions on how it's going to balance this budget within the $6 million shortfall. So I guess the answer is stay tuned for detail. It will be coming. The decisions have not been made up to this point. We've clarified some of the significant issues that are facing us, and there are scenarios that we're working on, and scenarios that senior staff's going to be working with the board, with board members on over the next few weeks, because very soon we're going to have to balance this budget and move forward and putting our best foot forward to put the best educational system in place for our children. That's my presentation, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.